Hey everyone, there are so many different ways that we can go around and paint and build bases for our models. And for things like 40k and other game systems that are more sci-fi and modern, we may want to have some sort of city ruined base at some point, or potentially just widen it out for some sort of scene or diorama. And today I'm going to be tackling just that. And what we're going to do is essentially make these nice city ruined rubbly bases, which don't take a lot of effort to make, are quite simple to paint, and we essentially can use a lot of different materials. I've got a variety of tools and equipment here, and I'm sure you'll be able to find very similar types of things wherever you may be. So let's not waste any more time and we can jump in to the building. And to start all of this off, we are going to need a little bit of different variety in items. I'm going to be jumping into the basing bin that we have here and digging out some items. I've managed to find some suitable plaster chunks, pipes, wires, a little bit of mesh, and also this really nice miniature I-beam, which will do well for modern or sci-fi bases. Once we've got all of our chosen elements, regardless of where you found them and what you're using, we can begin. And as always, we are going to start this off by putting down a nice layer of cork sheet on top of our base, which gives us a slightly larger area to work with. Now, obviously I understand that I'm using a varying amount of different things here, and I have an entire box full of random bits like this that I can use for basing, scenes, dioramas and things like that, and you might not have something like that available. The good thing about this is a lot of these things can be replaced with things that are readily available and around the house or custom made. Probably the hardest thing would be this I-beam, which is a custom made plastic piece, but is only a couple of pounds. Everything else, things like the pipes and the wires, if we don't have those, we can essentially just swap them out for a similar sort of product. So for pipes, we could look at thin straws or something like that, which would achieve the same function. So we do have a lot of options on things that we can use for these bases, and we just want a large variety of textures, surfaces to simulate things like a city, which is going to have multiple different surfaces, textures and things within it falling down around your ears. And we get that nicely from a selection of random things, such as I'm using cork, plaster, plastic and metal to give us a nice bit of tonal difference and texture difference across the base. With our expanded base section, also known as the cork plate, glued down on the top of the base, we can move on to the other various items. Now we are going to need to make sure that we do keep space for the model or scene that we're building, and I generally suggest the easiest way of doing this is to build your bases at the same time that you build the models, meaning we can check foot placement and overall space for weapons. But for now, we can just start to glue down various elements. Here, we're going to start off by building a couple of piles of rubble, and these are made from some snapped bits of plaster, as well as a few small bits of cork for additional texture. Then what we can do is get a nice little bit of wire, and essentially wrap this around the sections of rubble and tie them together nicely, to kind of simulate that they were connected at one particular time. Then all we're going to do is finish it up by dropping in a little bit of wire mesh, and we can move on to another area. When we're building our bases, we do want to consider a couple of things. First off, we do need to think about, if possible, what we're going to be painting the base like, and also what we're going to be painting the model on top of the base like. And the reason for this is, first off, we want our base to match our models and complement it well and not detract from it. But also, we have an understanding of how we're painting the base means that we can add items to the base to expand our color range on that area. So for example, we're going to be painting all of the rocks and everything as rocks and rubble. But the metals, currently the wire mesh, the wire that is on the base, and if we chucked on the I-beam, that's going to all be silver. And I wanted to add in a little bit of different colors, tones and metals. So the way I did that was by adding in a pipe, but rather than having the pipe in its own separate area and just on its own, I decided to fit it into one half of the I-beam. Once that's glued in place, we can paint it as a separate metal, and it looks a little bit like a conduit running up the inside of a building. Obviously, we could then build that out slightly further by putting things like wires coming out the end of the pipe to build up that feel a little bit more. Once we've merged our plastic I-beam and our metal pipe together, we can then glue this down onto the base in our chosen location, which brings us onto the second bit of information that I wanted to highlight in regards to the base, and that is the actual order of application. Now, we could have done this slightly differently. We could have gone in and done the ground texture first, and then built all the items on top of it. But instead, now that everything is glued down, we are going to choose to apply the texture paste at this point. What this means is that some of the other elements that are on the base are going to get caught up in this application. So we will predominantly be catching the main flat areas or floor of the base, but we'll get a nice spread of texture across the other elements, which is something that I could realistically expect in a rubbly battle scenario, where you're going to have dust and rubble falling into the ground and bits of ground in the rubble, and it gives that nice mix match of textures that we can work with on the painting stage. At that point, it's just a case of making sure that you are subscribed to the channel and then letting all of the work that we've done so far dry. Once it is, we can then simply go around and apply a nice zenithal undercoat to our base, ready for all of the painting. And the reason that we're doing that is the same reason I like to zenithal most of my models, which is simply because we get a nice bright surface at the highlighted points or the raised areas, and we get some nice deep dark shadows in all of the recesses. That means that our next steps on which we're going to be going through are really nice, simple and quick and easy to apply, and it doesn't take a long time. So if we're doing an army with a large amount of models, we're not going to be spending hours on each one. Starting off the paint job, we can give all of the groundwork a nice wash of our chosen colour. Because we've zenithal highlighted the base, we will get a nice range of tones and highlights straight away once we apply the wash. We can also do the exact same thing to all of the rubble, but this time I would suggest using a darker tone wash, perhaps a black or a brown, which will help to fill in all of the recesses before we go in and do some overbrushing. What we're going to be doing is an initial overbrush using a desaturated purple, trying to capture as much of the area as we can, leaving the wash in the recesses, which has dried by this point. Then we can come in and follow it up with a nice desaturated blue to act as a highlight, which will be dry brushed on. By doing this, we achieve a nice range of tones across all of those rubbly areas. And what I'm trying to represent in this manner is essentially, imagine a blue concreted wall or something similar that has been imploded or exploded, and then all of those compounds are crashed down around the area. So we're going to get a nice dusty sort of effect from the dry brushing that we've applied across the rocks. When we're doing that last dry brush, I would also suggest lightly dry brushing a few of the other elements across the base that have had a wash so far. And the reason for this is that will add the same kind of tone across the rest of those areas, which will help tie in the dust and particles from the rubble across the rest of the base without it being clearly a blue line that we've streaked across. So we get a nice bit of tonal difference without a lot of work. Now that all of our areas apart from the metals are painted on the base, we can do a final set of washes. And what we want to do is apply both the ground and the rubble washes to the appropriate areas using the same tone and colour that we did on the first round of washes. Once these are dry, this will help to tie all of those colours in, and then we can do a final optional round of dry brushing. If we're going to do this, we want to use the lightest colour we used for painting the rubble and do a dry brush on the very tips and edges, just in order to give us a little pop of colour. Then all we have to do is go around and tackle the metals, and these are going to be tackled first off by applying a black base coat, which will help to give us the shiniest results that we can achieve. Then we can follow it up by applying a layer of a metallics. Here we're going for silver for things like the I-beam, the fence and the wire, while the pipe that is implanted into the I-beam that we're using as a conduit is painted a nice bronze tone. Once our metallics are actually dry and we've got that nice metal base coat down, there are multiple different ways that we can tackle it from now on. We could essentially use some specialist technical paints in order to apply some rust and details like that. We could just slap a normal wash over it and pull out all of those details nicely with an acrylic wash. However, what we're going to be doing is actually making an oil wash, and we're going to be making that up for our metals using some thinner as well as some oil paints. By mixing them together and making it to about the same sort of consistency as a Citadel wash, we can do the next steps really nice and simply and essentially slap the colour on without too much care, as long as we're targeting roughly the right locations. With our oil paints made and roughly the same consistency as a Citadel wash, we just need to double check that we are subscribed to the channel, and then we can apply these washes all over the metal areas. We want to hit all of the silver areas with a nice coat of the orange oil wash, and this will represent some typical rust quite nicely. Whereas the copper pipe is going to get a coat of a turquoise wash. And that leaves us with this really simple to make and nice looking base that is something that we can build a large amount of for an army or a large diorama or something like that. And the best bit is while we use particular products here, we can essentially use anything as long as we get a bit of variety of texture in there. We can build the simulation of a city ruin quite easily. So it's great for things like 40k. I'm thinking specifically this base would be good for something like Astra Militarum or Genestealer Cults. Now, if you've made it this far, you might not have noticed my subliminal requests for you to subscribe to the channel. But don't worry, I'm not going to be asking again. What I'm actually going to do is say if you liked this video, then you might like another video that we've done, which is this video around bases for boundary fences and things like that go very, very well with this style of base if you're making a diorama or a larger type of army. So I would suggest checking that out. Otherwise, remember to subscribe so that we can see you next time.